Hello and a very warm welcome to this fresh edition of World's Panorama, the only show that gives you a 360-degree view of major global news. I'm Sana Khan. Before we get you detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. China shuffles military leaders ahead of wider party transition. World Panorama takes a look at the bigger picture of once-in-a-decade power transfer. Syria declares Eid ceasefire through Monday despite the peace call. Shelling continues. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney clash over Libya, Middle East. In last encounter, Obama holds slim lead. And Lance Armstrong stripped of all 7 Tour de France titles, banned from cycling for life after doping report. And straight to the story in focus this week. Against the backdrop of the political banter and vociferous canvassing of the US presidential election, a far quieter yet equally significant leadership transition is underway in China. China is preparing for a major leadership turnover of its own during the second week of November, with Xi Jinping slated to take the reins from Hu Jintao as General Secretary of the Communist Party. Yet, propaganda officials keep a tight lid not only on the details of these party officials' private lives, but even on basic facts surrounding the 18th Party Congress. The dates for the Congress itself, in fact, were announced only a few weeks ago. World's Panorama this week takes a closer look at what political transition China is about to see in the weeks to come. For that, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Srikanth Kondapalli. He's the chairperson in the Center for East Asian Studies at the JNU. Thanks, sir, so much for joining me this week. Before that, let's have a look at this report. There is the lightest breeze of change blowing from China's ruling Communist Party. The ruling elite has decided to drop references to Mao Zedong thought standard in all party communiques. This commissioned omission has been spotted at once as a broad hint that the Politburo will move towards reform as the time approaches for a generational leadership change. According to reports in the Chinese media, 3 most powerful men have come up with preferred candidates to head up the nation's new leadership. The 7-member list has been drawn up by past, present and future presidents ahead of a once-in-a-decade leadership change to be finalized next month at the ruling Communist Party's 18th Congress. Their list, still subject to opposition and change by other party elders, envisages a standing committee cut to 7 from 9 and headed by Xi and Premier-designate Li Keqiang, who is considered the only other certainty to make the top team.
I think the important reason is that by cutting out 2 positions, one of the positions they cut out is what's called the political and legal affairs portfolio. And I think the decision, it's preferred to keep the person who has that portfolio outside of the Politburo Standing Committee, because that person to a certain extent controls the gun, he controls the police, and it's much better to have that person outside of the room when they have big discussions and if there's a disagreement than to have the person with that kind of power sitting inside the room. So I think that's an important change from the 9 to the 7.
Who runs China matters. China has been a global success story with its rapid growth lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and buoying the world economy. But its juggernaut economy of the past 2 decades is flagging just as new middle class and tens of millions of rural migrants expect a better life. Beijing is also engaged in tense territorial disputes with Japan and other neighbors and is often at odds with the US and other established powers over issues as diverse as Syria's civil war and climate change. China is looking for leadership. Let's turn to our guest straight away. Sir, what do you have to say about, first, the very recent development that took place, the reshuffle in the military leadership? Does it have a far-reaching impact on what we're about to see in November?
Well, in terms of the military appointments, recent reshuffle, this is based on the retirement age imposed during the 1980s. After 68, they are supposed to retire in the military as well as in the Politburo as well.
Okay.
But since if supposing somebody is about 67-year-old when taking positions, but still would continue for the next, say, 3 or 4 years' time, depending on the tenure. So, for example, currently the defense minister is over 71 years old. Liang Kuang-lie, who had visited Delhi last month, he is about 70s. So what basically it reflects to is the retirement age being imposed.
Okay.
So number one, we should see that from the point of view of the age limit being imposed.
Okay, so it was anyways coming at this time.
Exactly. Second, they have promoted more younger people and highly professional people. For example, Ma Xiaotian, General Ma Xiaotian, became the Air Force Chief. Ma Xiaotian, if you remember, also came to Delhi in December to head the 4th Defense Annual Dialogue with the Defense Secretary in India. So he's also not new to India. Ma Xiaotian is pretty younger, and he is also an Air Force officer. He served as the PLA Deputy Chief of General Staff. And he's more into the information warfare and electronic warfare. So they are more qualified in that way. And this indicates to the promotion for the younger as well as professional officers.
So, but China's military, the change in leadership and the political leadership that we'll be seeing, will it have any sort of impact on that? Does the Chinese military have say in the politics over there? That's what I'm coming to.
Well, actually, if you look at last 2 to 3 party congresses, the 16-party congress, the 17-party congress, which were held in 2002 and 2007, if you look at them, the PLA's influence was very little in the party congresses. Although the PLA will have roughly about 10% of the membership in the party congress deputies who are going to attend in Beijing National Congress on November 8th. However, we don't probably see the PLA being represented in the next Politburo Standing Committee. There were only 2 members in the Politburo, 25 members of the Politburo. There are only 2 members from the PLA in the 17-party Congress, which indicates that their position has been drastically reduced for the last 3 to 4 party congresses. So this trend is going to be replicated again, which means that we may not probably see the PLA present in the Politburo Standing Committee. Very few possibly in the Politburo membership. Out of 25, probably 1 or 2 will be from the PLA.
Also, let's talk about what's going to happen on the 8th of November. The Congress, will be convened. What should we look forward to when that happens? Because it's fairly a wide, event that's going to take place. Many things are going to unfold at that time. So that's what everyone is looking to at this point in time. Give us a sense of what we can expect.
Well, not many details are available, yet based on some of the Chinese grapevine, as it is in Beijing and other places. A couple of months ago, there was a meeting in Peitaiha, which is a sea resort. Most of the leaders, prospective leaders, as well as the previous leaders, the so-called elders, they met in Peitaiha, and they would have decided about the 7-member Politburo Standing Committee members, also probably about the 25-member Politburo members. So while the official process is that when they convene on November 8th, the Congress would then choose the Central Committee, which is roughly about 200 odd members. The Central Committee ought to elect the Politburo, and the Politburo Standing Committee. That's the official way of looking at the process of election. However, at Peitaiha meeting, they would have already chosen at least 5 out of 7 members of the Politburo Standing Committee. What we have in news is definitely Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang were to be the president and the premier. And A slight change from the previous party congress is that the current premier is number 3 ranking person in the Politburo Standing Committee, Premier Wen Jiabao, who came to Delhi in December 2010. He is 3rd in the ranking. However, Li Keqiang, who is going to replace Premier Wen Jiabao as the premier of the State Council, he is going to be the number 2 in the pecking order of the Communist Party.
So these new leaders that are about to come in, they do face a lot of challenges, the strained relations with the US and the rampant corruption. At the same time, the GDP numbers as well, which are slightly coming down. The question is, on the minds of people, will these new leaders be able to take charge? Because they're going to be here for another long term, and that's essentially going to lay out a map of where China is going in the next 5 years.
Yes, this party congress is very crucial. Number one, because out of 9 members, only 2 will be retained, Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang. Yeah. The next 7 members will be retiring, which means that we will have for the next decade, except for 2, the other 5 or 7 members. So complete leadership change will be there, almost complete leadership change will be there in the next. So this is one. Number 2, the kind of problems that they're going to visualize are different from, say, under Deng Xiaoping or under Jiang Zemin, or under the current president who is going to retire on November 8th, Hu Jintao. So the problems, for example, is there is the Gini coefficient, which measures the income inequalities between rural and urban areas. This is becoming alarming for China. Some suggest in the People's University in Beijing, they have conducted surveys. They indicate that this will be about 0.56 on a scale of 1 to 0, 0 to 1, which means that this is any country which passes through, say, 0.5 and above will have a breaking social order. So this is a major problem for China. In comparison, for example, for India, we have 0.36 on the Gini coefficient scale. So China had crossed the 0.5, reached up to 0.56, which basically indicates that the next generation of leadership will have tough time on their hands. This is number one. Right. Number two, we have also seen that as a result of the income inequalities, last year Tsinghua University carried a survey which suggested that there were about 180,000 protests. These are called mass incidents in China. So 180,000 protests as compared with about 5,500 in 1991. So basically indicate that the Communist Party will have domestic issues to tackle with right away.
All right. So a couple of challenges, you named it. So thanks so much for joining us this week on World Panorama. So all eyes on the 8th of November when China braces for a once-in-a-decade leadership change. On that note, we take a very quick break. After that, former Goldman Sachs director Rajat Gupta lands 2-year jail for insider trading. More on that in 2 minutes. You're watching World Panorama. From India Inc.'s Wall Street poster boy to being reduced to a convict in one of the biggest insider trading cases in the US, Rajat Gupta's stunning fall from grace has been improbable. The rise and fall of 63-year-old Gupta, who went from being one of the most successful India-born businessmen in the US to being called deceptive and dishonest after his conviction on insider trading charges, has been the stuff of legends. Here are the week's developments.
Fallen Wall Street insider Rajat Gupta was sentenced to 2 years in prison on the 24th of October for leaking Goldman Sachs boardroom secrets to the hedge fund manager at the center of US government's crackdown on insider trading. Making his first statement since being charged with insider trading over a year ago, 63-year-old Gupta read from a prepared statement for 6 minutes before being sentenced by US District Judge Jed Rakoff. The former Goldman director is the most influential corporate figure to be convicted in the White US probe of insider trading involving fund managers, traders, consultants, and executives. A Manhattan federal jury found him guilty in June of feeding tips about Goldman Sachs at the height of the 2008 financial crisis to hedge fund tycoon Raj Rajaratnam, his friend and business associate.
No, our only comment is obviously I believe strongly in Mr. Gupta's innocence, and we will be pursuing our appeal.
Let him come forward so we can...
Gupta's rise through the ranks of corporate America was stellar, with enviable posts like board seats at Goldman Sachs and Procter & Gamble, co-founder of the prestigious Indian School of Business, as also the United Nations, dotting his resume. However, it took only 1 year for Gupta's downfall. He was slapped with insider trading charges on the 26th of October last year, and the shine and honor that had become synonymous with Gupta's name began eroding after the FBI arrested him.
Over to Syria now, where the United Nations has thrown its weight behind a truce during Eid celebrations. But it remains to be seen whether either side will put down their arms. The Security Council issued a statement, all regional and international actors to use their influence to ensure the truce was implemented. But officials from across the myriad of opposition groups expressed their skepticism at the plan. Here's a report.
All I want to tell you is that after my visit to Damascus, there was an agreement amongst the Syrian government for a ceasefire during Eid.
Only hours after the international envoy to Syria announced a ceasefire plan for Eid al-Azha holiday, it was already thrown into doubt. Within the hour, Syria's foreign ministry said military commanders were still studying the proposal. And despite Brahimi's contention that most rebel groups he spoke to had agreed, there was little consensus within the opposition.
He spoke with transparency that those responsible for the ceasefire are those who carry weapons on the ground. From what we have sensed, there was no response to the ceasefire proposal from both sides.
Russia's UN ambassador, whose country is Syria's most important ally, told reporters following Wednesday's meeting that his country had received indications from Syria it would abide by the ceasefire.
We have had indications that they are accepting the proposal of Mr. Brahimi.
But what seemed to undermine the proposal the most was the continuing violence across the country. Atrib, around 30 km west of Aleppo, had been under bombardment for the 2 weeks the rebels had held it. Brahimi's ceasefire bid follows a failed 6-point peace plan by former Secretary General Kofi Annan, who stepped down as Syria envoy in August. President Barack Obama and Republican challenger Mitt Romney battled over foreign policy on Monday in their third and final debate as they sought to break a deadlock in opinion polls heading into final 2 weeks of campaigning. The debate was the last major opportunity for either candidate to appeal directly to millions of voters, especially the roughly 20% who've yet to make up their minds on who could still switch their support at the November 6 election.
In the last and final debate in the presidential race in Florida, the focus was clear: foreign policy of the United States. And both candidates, Barack Obama and his Republican opponent, took on each other aggressively over a host of issues.
Greatest threat of all is Iran, 4 years closer to a nuclear weapon. And we're going to have to recognize that we have to do as the president's done. We're going to have to put in place a very comprehensive and robust strategy to help the world of Islam and other parts of the world reject this radical violent extremism, which is, it's certainly not on the run.
I'm glad that you recognize that Al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. But Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1920s.
The two men did find accord on more than one occasion when it came to foreign policy. Each stressed unequivocal support for Israel when asked about a US response if the Jewish state were attacked by Iran.
First of all, Israel is a true friend. It is our greatest ally in the region. I will stand with Israel if they are attacked.
We will stand with Israel. And if Israel is attacked, we have their back. Not just diplomatically, not just culturally, but militarily. There's no question but that a nuclear Iran, a nuclear-capable Iran, is unacceptable to America.
As the Chinese closely watched the debate, President Barack Obama and Republican challenger Mitt Romney vowed to get tough on China's trade policies, but they mostly used the Asian giant as a foil to air competing domestic economic programs.
China's both an adversary, but also a potential partner in the international community if it's following the rules.
We'll also make sure that we have trade relations with China that work for us. I've watched year in and year out as companies have shut down and people have lost their jobs because China has not played by the same rules. And they're making some progress. They need to make more. That's why on day one, I will label them a currency manipulator.
There was also little substantive discussion of the challenge posed to US military preeminence in the Asia-Pacific region by China's rapid military buildup. The tone of the debate, the last of three held between the candidates before Americans vote, underscores how the tightly contested 6th November election is being fought primarily over the state of the US economy, with unemployment running just under 8%.
And well, it was a breather from the usual as UN chief danced Gangnam Style with Korean pop sensation Psy. Stay up for details after this short break. Thanks for staying with us. Time now to take a look at some of the other international news in a quick wrap. Here's Globe Watch.
Chinese lawmakers expelled disgraced leader Bo Xilai from the parliament on Friday, completing his expulsion from politics and stripping him of immunity from prosecution for a series of corruption charges. The leader was expelled from the Communist Party after a political scandal involving his wife. Bo Xilai is accused of abuse of power, bribe-taking and violating party discipline. Several people were injured and sent to hospital in the town of Shipway, western Myanmar, after sectarian violence earlier this week in the capital town of the troubled Rakhine state. Hundreds of homes were burnt as sectarian violence raged for a fifth day between Rohingya Muslims and Buddhists in western Myanmar. The violence is among the biggest test yet of a new reformist government that has vowed to forge unity in one of Asia's most ethnically diverse countries. Millions of Muslim pilgrims continue the annual Hajj by climbing Mount Arafat on Thursday near Mecca, after nearly 3 million traveled on Wednesday from the city's Grand Mosque to an enormous camp in Mina, just outside the Saudi Arabian city. At the top of this rocky hill, they stood in prayer, a moment many Muslims see as the climax of Hajj.
And if you've missed the week's biggest sporting events, here's your chance to catch up. We bring you sports action.
The UCI has banned Lance Armstrong from cycling and stripped him of his 7 Tour de France titles after accepting all findings of a USADA report on doping. All of Armstrong's results since August 1st, 1998 will now be erased from the record books. The UCI president said the organization accepted all findings of the recent USADA's investigation report. Frustrated Arsenal fans accused the board on Thursday of putting profit before performance after enduring another trophy-less season at the Premier League soccer club and the departure of striker Robin van Persie. Chief Executive told shareholders that soccer's pointless spending race was ending and tried to reassure them that Arsenal would have the financial resources in the next 2 years to compete with the best. Tiger Woods had another day of near misses on the greens as the 14 times major winner fired a second round 4 under par 67 on a stifling day at the CIMB Classic on Friday to trail leader Robert Garrigous by 5 shots. Woods had 6 birdies and 2 bogeys in his rounds and finished the day tied for 5th on 9 under 133.
Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap.
Marking 50 years after the first Bond film Dr. No was released, the latest 007 installment Skyfall celebrated its world premiere in company of Bond stars, past and present, as well as British royalty. James Bond actor Daniel Craig was joined on the red carpet by his fellow leading cast members, including Dame Judi Dench, Javier Bardem, Naomi Harris and Bernice Marlowe. Taylor Swift hosted a listening party for her 4th album Red in New York on Tuesday. The singer posed for photos on the red carpet and spoke with media, saying that she was excited to present her new material. The album's first single, We're Never Ever Getting Back Together, went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts and has been holding steadily in the top 5. South Korean rapper Psy danced his way into the United Nations on Tuesday. The mastermind behind the hit Gangnam Style met with UN Chief Ban Ki-moon to discuss how they can work together on global issues. Ban Ki-moon's spokesperson told reporters that while the Secretary General deals with weighty issues such as the conflict in Syria, he also believed it was important to engage other parts of society. Depeche Mode, the British synth-pop pioneers whose hits People Are People and Master and Servant cemented their status in 1980s new wave and beyond, announced that they're planning a 2013 worldwide tour to follow the release of a new album. The band, which has sold over 100 million records since 1981 debut album, said they will launch the tour in Tel Aviv on May 7th, followed by 34 shows in Europe and a leg in North America.
That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. I'll be back next week, same time, with more world news. Till then, you can join us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. This week, we wrap up in Italy. The Vatican Carriage Museum launched an extended collection of carriages and automobiles used by popes and cardinals. The most extravagant on display was the one Berliner, the Grand Gala, that was built in 1826 for Pope Leo XII. Goodbye and thank you for watching.